First United Methodist Church of Troy, we've seen a pretty steady stream of voters and heard that there had been long queues here even before the polls had opened. It is a warm day in this northwestern suburb of Detroit where Joe Biden would be expected to win comfortably if he's going to retake the state and the White House for the Democrats. Enthusiasm is clearly high despite the pandemic and the fact that 500,000 people in just this part of Michigan alone have already voted by mail or in person. We've seen the odd police car driving around, but the atmosphere has been calm and non-confrontational. As ever, the presidential placards are outnumbered by those for other local elections taking place for school boards or county sheriffs. But people have strong opinions about the choice on offer for the White House. Here's a snapshot of the opinions we've heard.
As far as like the COVID and the lines, it's like honestly felt like the same as last time I voted. It wasn't that bad at all. You know, it was pretty quick. I felt like pretty easy.
And how important is it for you to come and vote in person like this?
I think it's extremely important because I'm young and I have a lot of friends that aren't even voting, and that's kind of disappointing, especially considering the stance that we're in with the USA against Biden versus Trump. And I don't like Trump because he's not a good role model or leader, and I want somebody that the children can look up to, or just anyone can look up to for love and not hate or division. And it seems to be a lot of that. He seems to just be a more selfish and egotistical person. He tries to use money as a way to get their vote by saying he's going to save tax dollars or save on healthcare. When I think if you really want to be pro-American, you're going to take care of your own people with healthcare.
And you said you're not sure that young people you know, are going to vote?
Yeah, I know a lot of people that I thought were going to vote are just not voting just because they literally just don't feel like driving to the polls.
Really? That simple?
Yeah.
What's your message to them?
You're going to regret it one day, and one day you're going to be voting, and you'll see the difference your vote can make then.
So, how was it? You just voted. How was it today?
It's excellent. It's always excellent in Troy.
Different this time? The masks, the hand sanitizers?
Yeah, but it was very well orchestrated. No problems whatsoever.
And how important was it for you to come and vote in person like this?
It was, but it was very nostalgic for me because it's the first presidential election I'm voting without my husband. 4 years ago we did it together, and subsequently he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and he died 3 years ago. This was tough, but I wanted to do it in person.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yep.
And apart from obviously your thoughts about your husband, your late husband, what else was in your mind when you voted? What are the issues that are really driving you this year?
Well, even though I'm a retired public school teacher, my husband was a staunch Republican. I consider myself an independent, but I am a staunch Trump supporter. I do not want this country to become socialistic, and I just hope and pray. I mean, I'm Catholic, and it's in God's hands now.
You worry then if Joe Biden wins?
Yes, I do very much. Even though I was a public school teacher and taught 5,000 kids, Nick and I never had children of our own, therefore I don't have any grandchildren, so I don't have to worry about the next generations. However, I'm very, very scared for this country. Very scared.
The views of some of the voters here in Oakland County, Michigan. Well, the polls are still open, but early postal votes are already being counted. State officials have been preparing people for a process that could last for a couple of days. With so much at stake, they say it's far more important to do it properly than quickly.
Properly rather than quickly. Good advice for life, not just for elections. That was James Morrisoni in Michigan. We've heard from a handful of voters in a potentially key state. What about the candidates? President Trump visited his campaign headquarters in Arlington, Virginia, and had this answer to a question from a journalist about whether he's got two speeches prepared, one to declare victory, the other to accept defeat.
Winning is easy. Losing is never easy. Not for me, it's not. When you see rallies, the likes of which in the history of this country, probably in the history of the world, nobody's ever seen before, there's a tremendous love going on in this country, and there's really a tremendous unity. Nobody's ever seen that. When you take an airport, and the airport's not big enough to hold the crowds. Our opposition, as you know, we have a few people sitting in circles, and that's okay. That's not abnormal. That's not abnormal, actually. I mean, that's the way it is. But we would get crowds of 50,000 people, 45,000 people, more. It was an honor. They're great people. These are people that they appreciate what we did. And I really came here to thank you all. And then I'm going to say, and get immediately back to work.
As for Joe Biden, within the last few minutes, he's been out and about talking to supporters in Pennsylvania.
Yeah! middle class. I promise you this. I'm running as a proud Democrat. If you elect me, I'm going to be an American president. I'm going to be no red states or blue states, just the United States.
So, just before the blizzard of results starts to hit, what should we be looking out for and when? Professor Larry Sabato is Director of the Center for Politics at the University of Virginia. Larry, great to have you on the program. What are the key states that could give us a hint early in this election?
I can tell you what I know, but keep in mind, because of the pandemic and the enormous vote ahead of time, which has now topped 100 million people, the entire vote will be somewhere between 150 and 160 million people. So way over half have voted in advance, and many by mail, so they have to be individually counted. We don't know for sure which states will be able to handle this relatively quickly. Now, some have been counting all along, or they've been at least opening the envelope and preparing them to be sorted through the counters. But I would look, don't look to Pennsylvania. They have a very slow system. It'll be days before we know what happened there. North Carolina is relatively efficient. Georgia is relatively efficient, and surprisingly, Florida is relatively efficient. They have always wanted to prevent another Bush-Gore 2000 debacle.
Right, and I guess if Joe Biden does well, or better than expectations, or maybe just as well as the opinion polls suggest he might do in Florida, North Carolina, or Georgia, then that could be an early indication that it should be a good night for him, a bad night for President Trump.
Essentially, if Biden carries even one of those, and we can see it tonight or early hours of tomorrow or even by the end of the week, then probably he has won. Probably. If he takes Florida, he almost certainly has won. But Georgia, North Carolina, they were both Trump states the last time, as Florida was. Seems to me that if Trump is shedding states like that, then he's likely to lose some of the others in other parts of the country, like Arizona, which he also needs.
Right, but in terms of, people say that President Trump has been first and foremost in saying that he wants to see a result overnight. Are you in the camp that says it is possible but not probable that there will be a result overnight?
If there is a big margin, if this is not necessarily a landslide, but a near landslide, meaning, the definition of a landslide is 55-45 once you get rid of the third-party candidates in the calculation. If it's, 6 points, certainly 7, I think we'll be able to tell, and we can suggest that this is what's going to happen, but there isn't anybody that I know who's going to declare anything they don't have to after 2016. It was a giant embarrassment for everybody.
Well, let's talk about 2016, and let's talk about the opinion polls, which, they have solidly shown that Joe Biden, or suggested that Joe Biden has a lead, which is one of the reasons why, the number crunchers say that he's 90% likely to be the next president of the United States. What are the things do you think in favor of the polls being right?
There are very few undecideds. In fact, we did a special study just to find out when people made their decisions, and a large majority made their decisions between the day Donald Trump was elected in 2016 and the midterm of his term. And right now, it's under 4%, and most of them aren't telling us the truth. Some of them are going to vote. Others have already made up their mind, but they're just not admitting it to a pollster. So this is the campaign where we have spent billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars for as little as 4% of the population.
And in terms of the issue, this might be the most naive question you're asked today, if not, for the next several years. But is this election simply a referendum on Donald Trump?
No election for president is simply a referendum, but I've got to tell you, and I go back to the 50s, this is the closest approximation I've seen. I would have, prior to this year, said it was Carter Reagan in 1980 when Carter was overwhelmingly rejected, not because people wanted, at that time, the oldest man ever elected to the presidency, but because they couldn't take another 4 years of Jimmy Carter. Well, if Donald Trump loses, that's the key to it. People have basically decided they couldn't take another 4 years of Donald Trump. And they have elected a person, potentially, if he wins, 4 years older than Donald Trump.
Yeah. Larry, we've got maybe 45 seconds left, so I'm sorry to be brutal about this, but it's not just about the presidential elections, it's also about the Senate, to perhaps a lesser extent about the House, and also about state legislatures. How important are all those?
They're very important, particularly the U.S. Senate. No one disputes that the House is staying Democratic. In fact, I think Democrats are going to add seats in the House. The Senate is very close, though. And let's say Biden wins, how's he going to govern without at least a one-seat majority in the U.S. Senate? They can kill almost anything.
But the polls are suggesting that the Democrats are likely to have a majority there as well.
Well, I think they probably will, but it could be 50-50 with the tie broken by the new vice president.
Right, fascinating. Larry, you have got a long, busy, fascinating night ahead of you.
To the system used to elect their presidents. It's called the Electoral College and is more elaborate than a simple tally of each candidate's votes. However, since 2016, support for the Electoral College has actually increased. To explain what it is and why it's used, here's the newsroom's Jonathan Savage.
There are 328 million Americans, but the winner isn't decided simply by counting 328 million votes, or whatever number of them are of voting age and choose to take part. No, rather than 328 million, it's just 538 Electoral College votes. Those 538 votes are divided among the 50 states based roughly on their relative population. For example, California has 55 votes, Delaware has just 3. So, for example, on Tuesday, Joe Biden won the support of most Californians and collected those 55 Electoral College votes. The winner of the election is the candidate who gets 270 votes or more. So why does the US do it this way? Well, one of the arguments is that as a federal nation, smaller, less populated areas should have a disproportionately loud voice to ensure their own specific issues aren't drowned out by large urban populations. Of course, the big criticism of the Electoral College is that many say the person who wins the election should simply be the person who wins the most votes, and that doesn't always happen. In 2000, Al Gore won 500,000 more votes across the country than George W. Bush, yet it was Mr. Bush who became the 43rd President of the United States. And in 2016, you don't need me to remind you that Donald Trump had fewer supporters overall than Hillary Clinton, almost 3 million fewer. Love it or hate it, the Electoral College system has had a big impact on the world as we know it.
Jonathan Savage. Millions of votes are still to be counted, but President Trump has already claimed to have won and vowed to launch a Supreme Court challenge alleging fraud. He provided no evidence for that claim. His challenger, the Democrat Joe Biden, said he was on track to victory. Mr. Trump has retained Florida, Texas, and Ohio. Mr. Biden appears to be on course to take Arizona and is making gains in Wisconsin and Michigan. But the final result could take days to be decided, while early and postal ballots are counted in swing states in the Midwest. Our US correspondent Neda Tawfiq has this report.
Ballots are being counted across the country as this race is too close to call. These global forces.
At his drive-in election night party in Wilmington, Delaware, the former vice president swung by in his motorcade after watching the results from home. He told supporters that he was on track to win.
I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election.
Those present remained hopeful, if not anxious.
I'm feeling fine. We're about to take Arizona. We weren't supposed to take all those states that they're making a big deal out of. We came close in some of them.
No, I'm not 100% confident that Joe will win. I want him to win more than any other president that I've voted for in my whole entire life.
Yet at an indoor event at the White House, President Trump threw the race into further uncertainty by falsely claiming victory and threatening a legal battle.
This is a major fraud in our nation. We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We will win this, and as far as I'm concerned, we already have one. So I just want to...
While millions of legitimate votes remain uncounted, the president cannot credibly claim to have won the election, and there is no evidence of fraud. The Biden campaign in a statement said the president's comments were outrageous and that their legal teams were standing by ready.
Listen, I've talked tonight now not as a former governor, but as a former U.S. attorney.
Even allies of the president, such as former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, criticized his statement.
And I disagree with what he did tonight. It's not the kind of decision you would expect someone to make who holds the position he holds.
It may be days until the outcome of the election is known, but already it's shown the deep divides in America will be hard to overcome.
That report by editor Taufik. A lot better than the polls predicted beforehand. Sir Epps is a constitutional law expert and professor of law at the University of Baltimore.
I don't know of any legal basis to claim that states cannot count legal votes that were cast in the proper fashion on or before Election Day. But what Trump is saying is no more counting. He basically, being Trump, says no more voting, right? Meaning I just want to shut the count down. There's no legal basis for that I can conceive of.
That was Garrett Epps from the University of Baltimore.
And President Trump has 213, but that only sort of tells us part of the story of the two men seeking this magic number of 270. Let's just look at some of those states that the two men need to win: Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Some of those states are so tight, it is a hair's breadth between the two men. Joe Biden realistically needs 3 of them. Donald Trump needs 4. But Wisconsin could come in at any time, and one would suggest that is so within the margin of error, is such a tight race there, that the Trump campaign, if he loses that state, would potentially launch a legal challenge there for a recount.
And Mr. Trump wants the counting in some states to stop. What likelihood is there that the Supreme Court will rule on that?
Well, the Supreme Court themselves can't count the votes, but of course this brings back so many echoes of the year 2000 and the hanging chads of Florida and the disputed and entangled and protracted legal process there. Clearly they can, and the states themselves have mechanisms to allow vote counts in the case of very tight races, and we can expect the Trump administration, if they are in a very, very tight spot in some of those races, will pursue those legal avenues, every single one made available to them. Similarly, Joe Biden's campaign has been lawyered up all the way through this and very ready, I would say, for the legal challenges that would come their way in the event that he is declared winner of some of these tight races and winner overall, because he reaches that 270 Electoral College vote number.
And the hanging chads of Florida took a long time to resolve, didn't they? I mean, when might we expect to know for sure who's won?
They did. I mean, I think we will have a clearer picture on some of those key places that we mentioned earlier pretty soon. Maybe by the end of today we might know Wisconsin, possibly Michigan quite soon after that too. Pennsylvania is the one where all eyes are turned. That's which had all of these postal ballots coming in beforehand, millions of them, but didn't start the process of counting until the end of polling day, and that has sort of put everything back a bit. Of course, that too is where the Trump administration tried to make sure that the votes couldn't be counted counted as late as 3 days after the end of polling day, but failed in that endeavour. So yeah, all eyes potentially are on Pennsylvania when it comes to trying to work out how this looks in the coming hours and certainly days, but we might actually have a clearer idea within the next 24 hours.
We have been known for weeks. Businesses have been preparing for whatever may come, not just for the next presidential term, but for the next few days as well. Some companies in parts of the US, Washington DC, New York, Los Angeles, are nervous, fearing protests and even looting if the election outcome descends into chaos. On one of America's most famous roads, Rodeo Drive in LA, boutique stores have been boarded up. The Beverly Hills Police Department, Dominic Ravetti, says they're taking the possibility of trouble very seriously.
Rodeo Drive will be closed to all vehicular and pedestrian traffic. Our department is on maximum deployment since last Saturday and will continue that for however long it takes to protect our city. Maximum deployment means 12 hours on, 12 hours off, no days off, no vacation for the officers until this threat passes.
This was the reaction of shoppers in Los Angeles as plywood was nailed and drilled onto windows.
People are afraid. Obviously, if you just guarded your stores with wood, it's because you are afraid.
Nobody should be scared to be in this area. This is Beverly Hills. This should be a safe place. But I feel like any action needs to be took to make sure everything is okay. You know what I'm saying?
I wouldn't say it's dramatic. I would just say it's realistic. We've seen things happen before and stores getting broken into. I would just say they're taking their precautions. It's what can you do?
We can talk to BBC Business correspondent Samira Hussain, who joins us from New York. Hi, Samira.
Hi there.
How are businesses near you preparing for the election outcome?
Well, look, some of New York City's best-known shopping districts, so we're talking about Soho, we're talking about Midtown Manhattan, and even nearby where I am in Brooklyn, New York, are doing the same thing that you heard about happening in Beverly Hills. They are boarding up. They are protecting their stores because they are, in fact, worried about those same things, potential rioting, potential looting. Remember, some of these areas that are taking these precautions are areas that had seen looting earlier in June as part of the Black Lives Matter protests. And so there's just a lot of concern here and a lot of stores are taking precautions.
Okay, now we know that the opinion polls put Joe Biden ahead nationally, but there are some polls that show Donald Trump in front in some key swing states. What does the stock market tell us about the potential result?
So the stock market, it's been a pretty interesting ride the last few weeks. Remember last week we saw some really dramatic falls. Investors were clearly quite nervous. But yesterday and even today, we're actually seeing some big gains. So there's a few reasons for that. One, it is possible that we're seeing that investors are taking advantage of the fact that we saw these dramatic falls, and so they're buying low, sell high. I think we all know that part. But also, I think increasingly what's being seen now is that investors feel like it is possible that we may see an election result sooner than anticipated, and that it does seem as if vice presidential candidate Joe Biden is in the lead, and that offers markets certainty. And remember, that is what investors want. They want certainty. They want a known kind of outcome. Any kind of uncertainty is really destabilizing for financial markets.
And what is the latest thinking on when we may know who has won?
The big question, I think a lot of people are still gaming it out. It really depends on how different states go. I saw a really interesting sort of map that just sort of tracked what happens in terms of if a certain state goes to one candidate over another and how long you're going to have to wait for the votes to come back in those swing states. One of those really big, crucial swing states is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania. There's a lot of Electoral College votes that are up for grabs there. And unfortunately, Pennsylvania is one of those states which you cannot start counting until the election until voting is over. And so that may in fact delay the results that we might see.
Okay, could be an interesting few days, maybe weeks, few days. Samira, in New York, thank you. Well, I've been talking to Randy Krosner, the Deputy Dean of the Chicago Booth School of Business. He was also a governor of the US Federal Reserve from 2006 until 2009. If there is a delay to the election results at a state level as well as nationally, what might that mean for financial markets?
So certainly there's going to be a lot of volatility in the markets, and I think you're exactly right. It's not just about the presidential campaign, and obviously that's very important, who wins, but also the control of the Senate. If you look at the polls right now, it's a dead heat, 50-50, and so that's going to be something very close to watch.
What about the economic impact of all of this? Do businesses perhaps decide they're not going to hire, they're not going to invest because of political uncertainty in Washington?
I think right now the uncertainty about the health situation is so great that even overwhelms this. Obviously, there may be a different approach taken by President Trump versus President Biden on the potential for lockdowns and dealing with the virus. But I think the virus is really the first order thing that is affecting businesses willing to invest.
This is not the first time there would have been some kind of delay to the final election results. Back in 2000, the hanging chads affair, we didn't know who had won the election for a number of weeks. Are there lessons from then that people could perhaps learn for this time?
Well, I think that there will be a lot of uncertainty and volatility and hand-wringing in the short run, but eventually we will get through that, and we will have a president, and we will be able to move on.
And once we do know the outcome, just how consequential is this election for businesses and for the economy?
I think it's a very important one. In many elections in the past, people have said, well, I really don't have much of a choice. I can pick one candidate or the other to be quite similar. That is definitely not the case here. For example, energy policy. I don't think you can find two candidates that are more different about energy policy. Biden wins, you're going to have a lot of focus on green energy, you're going to have subsidies, you're going to have a lot of investment in that area. If President Trump is reelected, you're going to have exactly the opposite.
So businesses then at the moment really have no idea what kind of regulatory energy environment they'll be operating in a couple of months' time.
I think that's right. There could be very different regulatory environments, very different energy policy environments, very different tax regimes. I think there's a really stark contrast here, and so it's quite a consequential election for the economy as well as for the country.
When it comes to the coronavirus pandemic, there's been an awful lot of discussion in Washington about some kind of stimulus, or perhaps a rescue package might be a better term. Do you think that will come once the political situation in Washington has settled down, no matter who takes the White House?
It certainly won't happen before it settles down, and I think it's going to depend a lot on what happens with the Senate. Whether the Senate stays with the Republicans or goes to the Democrats, they're going to really change that dynamic. If you have both the lower house and the upper house both being with the Democrats, it's going to be much easier for them to pass a bill, and they will have a lot more leverage over the administration to get something through.
Ballots. President Trump currently has 214 Electoral College votes, and Joe Biden has 243, 253 if you include Wisconsin, which has been declared in his favor. Among the states not yet declared are two in the west and southwest, Nevada and Arizona. Yesterday we looked at the votes going decidedly in favor of Joe Biden in Arizona, but there appears to have been a narrowing of Mr. Biden's lead there. And in Nevada, it appears to be on a knife edge, with the Attorney General insisting there have been no irregularities. Let's go to Phoenix in Arizona and speak to Jamie Serretta, a reporter with AZ Family on our CBS affiliated network. We are speaking to you from Maricopa County, which of course is where the initial votes suggested that Joe Biden was doing very well.
Good morning to you. Yes, I am outside the Maricopa County election headquarters here. We've been watching some of the ballot workers come in for their shifts here this morning. I'll tell you what, it was a heck of a night overnight. Not only did we have Trump supporters gathered out here in this parking lot demanding that every ballot be counted, but we had some major gains for President Trump as well. There was a batch of ballots that had been tallied overnight. So at 1 a.m. Arizona time, we learned that President Trump gained nearly 11,000 votes right here in Maricopa County. So that meant former Vice President Joe Biden's lead dropped to 68,390 votes. Now we still have 430,000 votes left to count statewide. Some 275,000 of those come from right here in Maricopa County. So we are all watching and waiting as these ballots are being counted. You know that Arizona has historically been a very Republican state. So to watch and hear our state be called as blue was a shock for many who live here. And now we are watching that gap narrow and are waiting to see what will happen right here in Maricopa County. We knew Arizona was going to be a battleground state. We had no idea just how much.
And in the context of that battleground state, there has clearly been a huge amount of tension. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, we have had a lot of tension. We've had a lot of protests. Just in June, we had some protests that did some damage in the Scottsdale area. Last night, things were peaceful, although they were rowdy and definitely wanted to make their voices heard as well. So we are watching that. The city is prepared for that. Of course, no one wants violence to happen with that. People want their voices heard and they want their ballots counted.
Jamie Serretta, reporter with AZ Family, CBS-affiliated network. Thanks for joining us live from Phoenix in Arizona. Let's return to Pennsylvania, a key state in this election, obviously. We can speak now to Mike Doyle, Democratic candidate for the 170th Legislative District of Philadelphia.